Hey everybody, welcome to Rink-Wide Toronto, presented by Bodog. Make a play, Canada's choice for free casino games, sports, odds, and poker strategies. David Alter joined alongside by Paul Hendrick as the Toronto Maple Leafs practiced on Monday as they get ready for a bit of stretch of a home games. They do have that one road game against the Canadiens, but they are going to be mostly home for a while. But one guy who's not going to be around for a while longer, Henny, is Nick Robertson. And the Leafs tweeting out news today that the 21-year-old forward had season-ending shoulder surgery. This is an injury he sustained against the Los Angeles Kings back on December the 8th. At the time, they announced a 6 to 8 week time frame, and they said that it was one of those ones where he could elect to do rehab instead of surgery. Well, clearly, whatever was going on there didn't seem to be working because the decision was ultimately made for Robertson to have season-ending surgery. And Henny, this is a tough blow. We talked about his injury history, but to have what looked like just a check along the boards, remember him grabbing his shoulder and immediately going off. You knew right then and there it was a shoulder injury. And for him to have season-ending surgery is just another tough blow to a talented young forward who just can't seem to get a break.
Yeah, it's too bad. And the good news about this, Dave, and again, I'm going to take the glasses half full. He's going to have surgery and he should be good to go come June. He's going to be more than ready to go come training camp. And I think back to Travis Dermott back in 2018. He nursed a separated shoulder back in the Calder Cup, didn't get to play in those last couple of games, had surgery, missed the start of the following season, but came back better than ever. But in this case, obviously, Nick's going to get a chance to come back to start the regular season, attend training camp if the timeline is correct. So that's the positive I'm going to take out of that. The negative is here was a guy who was expected maybe to compete for a spot in the top six. They've now had to audition a few other guys. Kelly Yarncroc now in that top six situation. And it's a step back for him. But what are you going to do? He's young. He's going to have the surgery. He's going to rehab that shoulder. It's going to come back better than ever. And it's just going to be a matter of getting back on the ice and having the confidence to go in the corner and withstand the pressure he's going to get physically come next fall. But at least they're going to get it attended to. And hopefully he's able to get his career back on track with a healthy shoulder come September.
Yeah, it was a collision along the corner boards with Los Angeles Kings defenseman Matt Roy. It happened early in the first period, if I remember correctly. And then he was gone and it didn't look very good. And I remember the positive tone from Sheldon Keefe that they are going to try to get this in through rehab and that every time he's come back, he's managed to look better and better. And so certainly they're going to hope for that as well. But just to recap the crazy year that Nick Robertson had. Well, so you'll remember he had a great training camp and probably should have made the team right out there and then, but because of his waiver eligible status and the Leafs are really tight up against the cap, he wasn't on the team for the first 4 games of the regular season. Dennis Malgin kind of got the top 6 spot that was available in that spot, but then Robertson did make his season debut against his brother on October 20th against the Dallas Stars, had 2 goals, including the overtime winner, which for a long time was Toronto's only overtime win of the season as they had all kinds of 3-on-3 issues there. And he looked like he was kind of fitting in with Tavares and Nylander, which was the second line at the time. Then he moved down as he started to struggle a little bit, was on the third line winger with Yarncroc for a game at center at one point, kind of going all around, sent down, called back up, played with Engvall and Yarncroc on the third line. Eventually did get an opportunity in the second line role, played on the fourth line at times as well. But then they were actually going to give him that run. He was there with Tavares and Marner when that was the new second line for 3 games against the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Dallas Stars, on the road for those 2 games there. But then he came back in that game against LA and he subsequently got hurt with the Marlies last year, has had to deal with all different kinds of stuff, broken fibula. This is tough. This is a really tough one for a guy who needs the reps, and to get that injury yeah, it's certainly going to be a tough blow. A lot of fans are high on Robertson's top six potential. It seemed like top six or nothing. Even Sheldon Keefe in the preseason was saying we need him to take this step up offensively. And I don't know what they do now. Now that they know he's not coming back, it just kind of amplifies the need that the Leafs do have in that top six. We've talked about Calle Jarnkrok and how he's kind of filled in that role pretty good lately. But now it's just going to be a matter of what do they do going forward here to figure that part out. And yeah, this is it's a tough blow for sure. Matt Hollowell also injured with the Marlies, out 3 weeks with a fractured kneecap. Probably wasn't going to factor in anytime soon in terms of where he was going to fit from a Leafs depth defensive standpoint. But another guy who got called up and played pretty well. But Henny, like we talked about it, Nick Robertson comes back next year. This is probably where he it's the make or break year, I've got to think, because at some point, when do you move on from a guy who gets injured too often if he can't get traction, if he suffers any sort of setback? We've seen it many times before with talented guys who just keep getting hurt. Like, when do the Leafs decide at some point or another in that following year if Nick Robertson is someone that they have to move on from because of his inability to just kind of stick around?
Yeah, and it's a question that is going to bear answering. You think of forwards who are UFAs after the season. I think Kemp is one. I think Bunting is one.
Yeah.
I think Pierre Engvall is one as well. I'm not saying all three go, but there should be an opening. But again, you're going to have to be able to count someone up there that is going to contribute. They obviously thought he could contribute at the beginning of the season, gave him a chance, and likely they're going to give him another chance. They've got to want to see him succeed. He's just too talented a guy. In the meantime, if there's the slightest chance that he's not going to succeed, it's going to be somebody else coming up either via trade or maybe there's somebody else in the organization. I just don't see it right now. But it's unfortunate. Right. It's just absolutely, I feel so, I'm just heartbroken for the guy. But he's going to have a chance down. All his focus is going to be on getting better. I mentioned Dermott. There are a bunch of other guys in that same category, whether it be ACL and all of these things. At least now this is an end of season injury come the spring. This is mid-season. So he's just going to focus on getting better next year, and hopefully it's going to be a nice story when all is said and done. He has yet another training camp. He comes back a little older, a little wiser, a little thicker, and is able to contribute. And we'll go from there. We talk about the Leafs' window of success, especially with the core of that top six. The window's still open, but they're going to have to just be a little hasty in what they do. So if it's going to be Nick Robertson, there better be a strong belief that he's able to come back. If not, they're going to have to find somebody else some way, somehow, and move from there. And then when we look a year from now, who the next pending UFAs are going to be in Austin and Willie Nylander, and again, more questions to be answered. So that window for the team as a whole, it could be immediate. Then again, if they're able to extend a couple of these guys, it might not be as immediate. And financially, it might be a good situation for a player like Nick Robertson to find himself slotting in where he might be at, given what little he's been able to contribute now, mostly because of injuries. So, a lot of question marks, Dave. I don't have any answers, but the good news is he's got a full half year to rehab this shoulder, get it repaired. The bad news is it's a big step back overall in his career, as he has to go back to training camp next year with a few question marks surrounding his name on the roster.
Yeah, and he should be there. He still has 1 year remaining after this year on his entry level. Because he hasn't played enough games, the contract slid all the way to that 5-year maximum. And so this will be year number 5 in the organization next year as a result. So they will have that 1 year. And then the qualifying offer to keep him around isn't very high. So there's also that. But then it's just a matter of if he can do some damage offensively in the 23-24 season. But certainly a tough blow for Nick Robertson, and we wish him well in his recovery. And see him back next year, as the Leafs do now have a bit of clarity there, and no, he is not an option for them this season. And maybe that clears up what the Leafs do from a top six standpoint, even though Kelly Yarncroke, as we've mentioned, has filled in pretty well with John Tavares and Mitch Marner in there. So, let's stick with that topic of the top six right now, because in that game against Boston, the Maple Leafs did reunite Matthews and Marner together for the final period.
Yeah.
And we thought, okay, maybe this is the time. This is the time where they switch back. But nope, at practice, they did go back to Matthews with Nylander and Tavares with Marner. And Sheldon Keefe saying that there was such a good flow with those split lines that he wanted to keep that going. Also knowing that it is a nice little option to do mid-game should they go to it. What do you make of that? That it's taken this long to see a reversion to that line for an extended stretch, and B, that it's not going to last very long, and that it's just going to be a coaching switch that's perhaps strategic mid-game.
Well, I totally agreed with what Sheldon did. They needed a bit of a boost, and you look back at that threesome last season, and just they were one of the most dominant lines in the National Hockey League. Problem there is, Dave, I think, is that you limit yourself to one really good line. The next line isn't quite as good. And what happens now, and everything now from the whole second half of the season, and we're there, and games are exponentially just going to peel off the schedule. You got to look at the playoffs. And a team like Tampa, who've been around, they are a seasoned postseason squad. They know what it's going to take to shut down one line. And if you put most of your eggs on that top line, then you've got little beyond that. And I think what Sheldon wants is he wants balance on that top line. He wants balance on the second line, and something that opposing teams are going to have to respect. You get Tampa with what they're able to throw at you defensively in terms of a shutdown series for 7 games over 14 days. You can't limit everything to one line. During the regular season, as we saw in Boston in the third period, we need a bit of a boost here. Let's put that great passer on there and reunite him with Austin and, of course, Mike Bunting. And I thought it worked out pretty well. But no, I think the key moving forward, getting ready for the playoffs, getting your top 2 lines in place in terms of what they can offer offensively, and really compromise Tampa when it comes to a 14-day series of making sure that you've got those 2 lines going. And I think it's best that you don't put Mitch with Bunting in Austin on a full time. You're going to have to tweak from time to time. But I think the big picture optimistic outlook is separating those guys and making sure that JT has got Mitch and that you've got 2 really good lines going to provide you scoring. My opinion.
That was a heck of a hockey game on Saturday against the Bruins. Easily the most exciting Leafs game I've watched this year, regardless of outcome, of course.
Yeah.
You saw why Boston is the class of the league. There's been times where the Leafs will make transitionary mistakes, and whether it's clearing it up the half wall or going east-west instead of north-south, you would see it at times, but the level of opponent that they would have would not burn them the same way the Boston Bruins burn the Maple Leafs in those opportunities. And that's why they're on this pace. Just as we're recording, the Boston Bruins just defeated the Philadelphia Flyers 6-0.
Yeah.
It seems like nothing is stopping them, even though they were coming off a loss to the Kraken 3-0, their first regulation loss at home. That might have fueled the Bruins more, but I thought, okay, maybe this is where the Leafs can kind of find a hole in the armor here and just try and exploit it. And they just couldn't do it. They were really in tough there. And now the Bruins are going to have a 13-point lead on the Leafs in the Atlantic Division from number 1 to 2. And then, there is a little bit of a Leafs are on top of Tampa by 4 points, but they've played 3 more games. So the points percentage does lean a little bit in Tampa's favor. Henny, what is there to play for at this point? Like, there is such a huge gap from where the Leafs are going to move. And then, okay, there's Tampa at home ice advantage. And yes, that's important. But then after that, the Sabres have 44 points. There's no budging in these top three right now. There's no budging for the top spot in the Atlantic spot. If you're the Leafs, you're just kind of throwing your hands up because between now until the end, aside from injuries, aside from anything else, do you just play freewheeling and just experiment with anything because you can? Or what do you do in this situation? I've seen positions so firmly in place early in the season, but this is the midway point, and it just seems like, okay, well, we know what's happening come playoff time.
You're going to see separation now, Dave, as you saw with the Bruins today against the Flyers. And the lesser lights in the league know that they can't compete with the upper elite, the top three teams, whether it be in the Metropolitan or the Atlantic. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that. You're starting to see it in the Atlantic with Sabres. Now have lost, since beating Boston, they've lost 3 or 5 of their next 8. They're sort of spinning their wheels again. Ottawa's not going anywhere right now. They've got to get their back line. Everything we talked about in training camp, their blue line, they've still got a ways to go, obviously. But for Toronto, I think there's a lot to play for. There's 6 weeks between now and the trade deadline. I think it's going to be imperative, obviously, and they're going to get a top 6 forward of some repute to help out there. And I think they're going to add another defenseman. They've got to do that. I've talked about Luke Schenn. I don't know where Luke's going. There's all sorts of rumors of him going to Boston and who knows where. But he's going to be going.
Seen Tampa. Tampa is reported as one of the teams interested in Luke Schenn as well.
Why wouldn't they? And why wouldn't Luke want to go back there? I'd love to see him in Toronto. But the Leafs are going to get somebody, whether it be Ryan O'Reilly or somebody. They're going to get him. So the other thing they've got to play for is use this time as a training camp for that first round. Dave, I thought it was a phenomenal hockey game, regardless of who won or lost on Saturday night. And I was disappointed with the result. But you saw a Toronto team that is susceptible to the forecheck and then turnovers. You saw how much TJ Brody was missed. That, in fact, impacts Morgan Rielly, who's now still working his way back from injury. He's a work in progress. But when you've played with the defenseman he's had to play with all due respect to Connor Timmins and others, Justin Hall included, Morgan misses TJ Brody. So I think, they're going to have to work on playing better under the forecheck, cleaner exits in their own zone, all of these things that they're going to see on a regular basis come mid-April. And that's what they've got to play with. And it might seem boring for the time being, but it's nice to know that you're not really looking over your shoulder too much to know that you've got to make the playoffs and win a stretch of games. I think you just play well, win the amount of games you're supposed to win. And whether it's the second place in the Atlantic or third place in the Atlantic, get ready to take it on Tampa because you can win down there. It's not going to be your first canoe trip when it comes to playing the Lightning, and giddy up and let's go. So lots to play with, but I know it seems like an awfully long time to have to sort of spin through this. It almost feels like that Canadian division of a few years ago. But they've just got to get ready.
Only 56 games.
Yeah. And I'm going to be, listen, the Bruins are great, but we're not going to have a parade up Causeway just yet. And those Bruin fans just sort of sit back and just wait and see, because the playoffs are going to be a different animal, but they're a good hockey club. Total respect for what they've achieved. It's just that the Leafs have got to play better in their own zone. And I thought they played great. It was awesome to see playoff type hockey like that. 43 games into the season? And I thought Toronto did well. They battled back. They had the lead. They came back on a terrific goal to make it 3-3. And I think it was Giordano on that winning goal for Boston who got caught out well too long. And then the puck gets turned over. They got to go back into their own zone. Tavares gives it up and and they score. Bruins are the toast of the league right now. But I know Toronto can compete. I know Tampa can compete. And we'll see what the likes of Jersey, et cetera, can do. But if the Leafs are to get to where they've got to get to, the road's going to go through Tampa and likely inevitably go through the Boston Bruins. And these are a couple of major giants that I'd love to see the Leafs slay if they can do it. But they're going to need a little bit of help along the way. And that's going to be a top 6 trade and some grit somewhere along the blue line. They just need it.
Look, I'll say this. I think that this positioning right now is probably in my opinion, the worst case or the worst thing for the Leafs right now.
Yeah.
I think they would have been better served with a lot of meaningful games between now and the playoffs and not having any sort of lulls where they can rest on their laurels a little bit. We've seen in previous years when that's kind of happened, they just kind of go into the playoffs and yeah, they play better and they do ratchet it up, but I think they needed a little bit of adversity kind of going into this. And I don't know if you're a Leaf fan, how you feel about this being so secure. If you've got the maturity to play defensively and do all that other stuff to take the next step, I'll happily eat my words. I will.
Yeah.
But I think they would have been better served with teams nipping at their heels, or at least something up there where they could really play for. That this Boston Tampa thing kind of feels a bit like Groundhog Day in a lot of ways.
But
go
Dave,
ahead. You
at least Toronto has their battle for second place with Tampa and home ice in that opening round.
They do.
What do you do if the Boston Bruins apply everything that you just said right now to Boston? Why are they any different from Toronto?
I guess because of the years of history of what they've done and the fact that there's just been no let up in their game this season. But I could be wrong. I mean, if they're right, look, I've mentioned this in past podcasts. I might have even mentioned it here, where the last 4 President's Trophy winners have all lost 4 consecutive playoff games en route to elimination. And maybe that's because they don't know how to bounce back from adversity when they don't have the long stretch of games to deal with, that the slide happens and then they're just out. So that could happen. You're right. It's possible. At the same time, I haven't seen a team play like Boston in a very long time. Like, that was my first time seeing that in person. Yeah. And it wasn't like how I saw the Florida Panthers in April last year against the Leafs in person. It was a very different, intense, do not give you an inch hockey club. They hounded the Maple Leafs on every transition. It was something to see. So we'll see. The Leafs could go on some sort of slide and maybe they get their adversity that way, and maybe they have to claw and scratch, and maybe they have some injuries between now and then. A lot can happen. The other thing we did see in that game is a couple of goals that the goaltender would have liked to have back. And so, there's times there where if you really want to get out of it, the goaltending, which is supposed to be the big story going into this season, has to be better. They've been better all season long. But those are the moments, and I kind of said this to a colleague of mine, when goals number 3 and 4 were given up, you picked up that type of goaltender to make sure that in a playoff-like vibe, that those aren't the ones that are given up. So it's just one game. We'll see. It was a great, entertaining game to watch, but certainly something I'm going to remember going in if they have a playoff series like this. It's just one of the ones you check back in terms of which games felt like playoff games, and that one certainly did. Yeah. And you remember how they kind of performed. And at the same time, the Maple Leafs defeated the Bruins at home 2-1 when the Bruins were 10-1 and looked like the real deal even back then. So there is a bit of a yin and a yang.
Yeah, and how did the Leafs play them that night? The Bruins, you look back at all their comments. Yeah. The Leafs were on top of us. We had no time or space in which to work with the puck. Bruins just took it right back to them. And Leafs lost 4-3. 2 games, 2-1 Toronto, 4-3 Boston. These 2 teams, I'll admit, Boston is the toast of the league. I'd have no credibility if I said otherwise, and I'd love to say otherwise, but they are indeed the toast of the league. But the Leafs aren't far behind. There are going to be changes made and players added. But for the most part, this is getting your bottom 6 organized, getting your top 6 organized. You know what I really enjoyed, and maybe we can talk about this Bruin game ad infinitum, but there were a few things that I really enjoyed, and that was Wayne Simmons and what he brought to the team. I felt a sense of security seeing him out there stirring it up and doing what he had to do. I don't think he's going to be a big factor, but in a game like that on the road, he was important, and they're going to need some of that grit. And again, Dryden Hunt, another guy, 5 hits. I don't think he's the answer, but obviously a little bit of sandpaper in the bottom 6, something they're going to need in a series that could take them toughly against Tampa in some of the grit that team has. And if they get a chance to get by that round and take on Boston, they're going to need some more bang guys to liaison to what maybe that top six might be able to do, and just find a way to score a couple or 3 goals. And you are so correct. Get the goaltending they need to get and the stops they need to get. And that said, against Matt Murray, they don't get to that point in time if he doesn't make a few other saves along the way. I mean, that save on Marchand was just absolutely outstanding. So you build on those sort of things. It was really good. It was pretty good.
If they don't get that save, that could have been a blowout easily. Like that early a goal scored, that could have been really bad news. Slow starts had been a theme when the Leafs had struggles earlier in the year. And so certainly that would not have looked good. And so while Murray was spectacular in that first period and he was really sharp, there were a couple of those moments. And so that's probably a work in progress between now and the postseason. We'll see how he performs down the stretch here. When we come back, we'll talk about Morgan Rielly, who you teased as well in that game, who had a very interesting night as well, along with Connor Timmins. But we'll talk about the way he approached practice on Monday and some other news and notes and an update on TJ Brodie when we return. You're listening to Rink-Wide Toronto, presented by Bodog. From sports odds to free casino games, make a play at bodog.net. Rink-Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Is your online business ready for the cookie-less future and set to properly capture your customers' valuable first-party data? Hey, it's Ray Ferraro. Right now, my friends at North Beach, along with their partners at Craft Growth, are offering small business owners and entrepreneurs a free website digital audit. So you can find out just exactly how ready your website is for the cookie-less future. Your online presence has never been more important. So visit craftgrowth.net and get your free digital audit. That's craftgrowth.net.
Welcome back to Rink-Wide Toronto, presented by Bodog. From sports odds to free casino games, make a play at bodog.net. David Alter alongside Paul Hendrick for an off-day edition of Rink-Wide Toronto, and it's time for the Bodog line of the day. Henny, we've been talking about Morgan Rielly, and we're going to continue to talk about him at length. He's been back for 9 games now, and he's had 5 different defensive partners since his return. Some of that is injury, but I don't think all of it is injury. He is still the leading ice time getter in that span. But some interesting stats that were brought to my attention here in the different defensive partners that he's had. In the 9 games that they've played together, Morgan Rielly and Timothy Liljegren have an expected goals share of 68%. That is exceptionally high in the short amount of time, 30.8 minutes of ice time that they've played together at 5-on-5. And now TJ Brodie is going to be out another week with a rib injury. We just got that update today at practice. And Rielly was back with Liljegren. Rasmus Sandin has been going through an illness that has been permeating throughout the team. It's why Austin Matthews wasn't able to come back for that second of the 2 games that he missed. Zach Aston Reese told me that it affected him on the off day during that dad's trip where he couldn't really go out with the dads and kind of felt bad about that. And Pontus Holmberg still has that bug as well. And so it looks like Rasmus Sandin might not be healthy enough to come back, and we get Rielly and Liljegren. But Henny, should Rielly and Liljegren be playing together even if Rasmus Sandin is back based on those numbers? Because I look at that and I look at the night that Rielly had with Connor Timmins and some of the other games as well. To me, this is someone you should be finding more stability with if you're going to be playing him in a top 4 role. To have this conveyor belt of different guys there can't be well served for a guy who's coming back and he himself trying to find a groove coming back from injury.
Well, I guess you can argue that your top defenseman should make others better, but I've never liked watching Morgan play with Justin Hall. I just don't think that's a good pairing. Connor Timmins, I think we're seeing, his inexperience, especially facing a team like Boston and some of the opposition that the Bruins threw out against that pairing, and that blind, behind the back pass inside the Bruin blue line, given the line that Boston had out there. You just don't do that. You ring that up along the boards. Okay, he made a mistake, but they were on the ice for, the first 3 Boston goals. So I think for Morgan's opportunity to put him in a position to succeed, who else with a right shot do you put up on that vacant side until TJ comes back? It's a Liljegren. And I think you've got to give Morgan the benefit of the doubt to have somebody of Liljegren's expertise on that side. I think come the playoffs, ideally, you've got Morgan and TJ Brody as your top pair. Your middle pairing will be the 2 Swedes, and then your third pairing is Giordano and Hull. I think, and Connor Timmins and Van at the 7 and 8, and maybe a defenseman that we don't know about who they're going to bring up. But right now, until you get there, you've got to give Morgan a chance to succeed. And I think Liljegren is the guy that they've got to go with right now to help him out. Natural right shot, very responsible defensively, and a guy who can help complement what he does offensively as well. And we lamented the fact that the Leafs are locked into either the 2 or 3 position. Well, here they go. They can navigate these injuries and have to play with that blue line yet again, as they've done the entire season, and not be overly concerned, knowing that they are going to make the playoffs, and you got a chance to fiddle around while everybody gets healthy, and then hopefully comes back in time for the postseason as a complete 3-pairing unit and go from there. But I think Timothy Liljegren's the only choice. I don't think Justin Hull's the choice. And I didn't really like Connor Timmins on the right side with Morgan on Saturday night.
Yeah, it was a rough one. A lot of colleagues and just chatter on Twitter kind of had flashbacks of Game 5 between the Montreal Canadiens when they saw that play. That led to the goal going back the other way with the pass across blue ice while being accosted by a couple of players.
Yeah.
But certainly a learning moment. But here's the other thing, too. Sheldon Keefe really likes Sandin and Liljegren together, so I understood that rationale, and he didn't want to disrupt Giordano Hall because those two have played pretty well together as well. I get that. But the Sandin and Liljegren one should be not as much of a priority when they're playing 5-6 as opposed to 3-4. Like, they are the 5-6 in there that as much as you trust Morgan Rielly to make everyone around better, I think Liljegren should have been in there from the get-go once TJ Brody was out, just because this is a player who is just exceptionally made a jump in his level of play from his first full season last year, even to now, that he just looks so comfortable out there. And when a guy's coming back from injury, I think you just have to go with the comfort. They did that for the first 2 games, but those first 2 games, Sandin was out with a neck injury, so they were forced to do it. Now I think you should do it whether you're forced or not. It looks like it'll happen against the Florida Panthers, but other than that, it doesn't look like there's necessarily a call one way or another. And yeah, TJ Brody is going to be out 1 more week, it looks like, with a rib injury. He didn't quite get out onto the ice today, but when he does come back, you're right. The Rielly-Brody pair seems to be the most consistent in that regard. So we'll see if that kind of goes. So on that, we look ahead. The Florida Panthers, that's a team that's now just passing the Buffalo Sabres. A really unexpectedly bad first half of the season, I guess you can kind of say. They do beat the Florida Panther, or they do beat the Buffalo Sabres 4-1 today. So I don't know. If there's any challenge, I think the Florida Panthers could be the one that surprises for the second half of the season. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I really don't, Dave. I think the die is cast with this hockey club, and boy, have they had a precipitous fall, from President Trophies winners a year ago to where they are now. And I'm a huge fan of Paul Maurice as a coach and as a person. I wish he nothing but success, but I just don't see how they do it. I think you're seeing a clear separation, as I've mentioned, in each of the divisions, especially in the East, of your 3 teams, and then there's a drop-off. There's a Hillary step, if you will, and Florida's clearly on the other side of that line. And, they may be tough on a game-to-game basis, but they are not in the same league of Boston, Tampa, or Toronto. And I think it's imperative that Toronto finds a way to get back in a winning groove and take advantage of their home schedule, as you've said right now. And they're smitten with that game in Montreal on the weekend. But to come back and show what they're capable of doing, and they should be, even with the blue line as banged up as it is right now, and certainly has been 12-2-1 without Morgan Rielly. If they're able to get it done then, I think they're capable of done now. It just means guys like Connor Timmins are going to see more ice time against really good opposition, but not alongside one Morgan Rielly. So I'm going to disagree with you. I just don't see Florida turning the corner and getting this season back. Stranger things have happened. We saw it with St. Louis a few years ago. I just don't think Florida's capable of doing that.
Yeah, I was looking at their schedule, and it looked like they had a ton of home games. Like that, they were on the road for a lot. Like the Leafs are on the road for a lot, but especially Florida. So, it remains to be seen. They are on the outside looking in, not even in the wild card spot right now, although they're knocking on the door of that. And I just wonder, because they made a big change when they got Matthew Tkachuk moved on from Huberdeau and really changed the foundation of their team, because they felt as much as their regular season success it wasn't good enough, and they really had to go for it and make themselves look better in the playoffs. So they're going to have to scratch and claw, no pun intended, to make that spot right now. But it looks like with the favorable schedule, they might be able to do it. And then that might be where the Leafs could be a bit vulnerable, because they're going to be up against a very hungry team in the Panthers come Tuesday. And then that'll be interesting as well. The Toronto Maple Leafs will have another road game against the Montreal Canadiens on Saturday. But then going into that break, there's not a lot of meat on the bones. They got the Winnipeg Jets as well on the 19th in Toronto. It's going to be interesting. They've gotten a lot of games. They're playing every other day. This was the last consecutive days off stretch that they have between now and February 1st, when they've got Boston to end a stretch of games and then go on that little break. We haven't really talked about the All-Star game too much as well. I know we did last week, but that'll be an interesting break for the Leafs as well. I don't know where we go with the Maple Leafs between now and then, because there's just a lot to play for and a lot not to play for, Henny. It's going to be a wild, slippery slope. For the Leafs, you're just in the mode of don't get hurt before the playoffs. And certainly the news of Robertson certainly doesn't help in terms of that vibe.
You sound like a reporter in the dog days of January, Dave, right now. It's a hard time, isn't it? You guys have got a story tell. If the team's not in the postseason, like a lot of the league teams I covered at this time, you had to story tell, and that gets old in itself. But there are going to be some interesting games, and they've got a chance to get better. They've got to do so. I think back to Florida and what you're talking about, their top heavy road schedule to begin the year. They do that because of the interest in college football in Florida, in South Florida. And so, once that season is done and the NFL season is pretty much done, they load up with the home games typically in the second half of the season. The thing about that's not fun. Too many home games, a team can get pretty predictable and lame. It's nice to mix up that road home balance as the schedule progresses throughout the year. I remember one year, Pat Quinn, the Leafs opened up with 5 or 6 consecutive home games, and Toronto went 1-5 in those home games, and Pat knew it. Guys were home for too long. They had to get out on the road to bond together. So I think Florida might be going through something like that. But right now, it's the battle for second in the Atlantic. I'm not going to totally concede top spot to Boston, but let's be realistic. You described it well. And getting a chance to watch a game in that Boston rink on a Saturday night, especially, it's magical. It's not violent, but boy, there's an edge in there that you can really sense, whether it be as a player or as a journalist. And I thought the Leafs, for the most part, handled themselves pretty well. They were able to be competitive. They needed a couple more saves, which they didn't get, and they needed to cut down on a couple of mistakes against the team that'll make you pay. So these are all things they get to work on as the season progresses. Take a nice break come the All-Star break, get the guys into some sunshine, and let's continue to get the core group here healed up and ready to go for mid-April. But mid-April can't come soon enough. But unfortunately, for hockey fans and for you guys who are listen, let's not make any mistake about this. You've got an outstanding job and you work your tail off. I absolutely know it. But you've got some work and some heavy lifting to do, as does the team, before the weather gets warmer and they get to play for real come mid-April. Now, I wish you all the best of luck in that regard.
That's okay, Henny. That's why I opened the TikToks, and that's why my reviews of the media meal have become the big thing right now.
Yeah.
So 40,000 plays on the Boston media meal, which I don't know if this was around when you were there last time, because I don't remember it being a staple, but they do a pasta bar now. I don't know if that's in homage to Pasternak, but they do a pasta bar, and I got the works. So I got absolutely everything. I did the rose sauce, which is an Ilya Samsonov specialty, where you mix the white and the red together. And then, but I put some pesto in there as well. So trust me, there's enough for me to chew on, no pun intended, or pun intended if you want, between now and then. And we'll be with you along the rest of the way. That's going to do it for another edition of Rink Wide Toronto, presented by Bodog. Make sure you rate and subscribe to all your favorite podcast platforms, to Rink Wide Toronto, presented by Bodog, Canada's choice for free casino games, poker tips, and sports odds. Rink Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Hey, it's Darren Dreger and Ray Ferraro from the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. And Ray, we're into the second half of the NHL season, and the trade deadline is obviously getting closer.
Every night, wins and losses are starting to mean more as teams try to stay in the mix in the standings to secure that playoff spot. And man, some teams could use some help before the deadline.
Yeah, we've got the storylines, trade rumblings all covered, along with the top hockey guests twice weekly, right here on the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. Check us out everywhere you get podcasts.